Hello students, welcome to the video lecture on how to read a critical or academic essay and a brief analysis of the article Sound Design for a Found Future, Alfonso Cuarón's Children of Men, that will help us understand and look at the other materials that you can read for the research project. So first, just some general background on the types of things you will read for the research project. So one of the things to think about with critical reviews and academic articles is they are a different breed of cat than things you may have read in the past, even things you may have read in the past to write a college paper about. Academic articles and critical articles, especially those in the humanities, social sciences, and other genres, are a unique genre, and they're different from things you might read on a general Google search, like a movie review, or an opinion piece, or a Wikipedia entry, or a blog post. Critical reviews and academic work will be challenging. They are trying to engage in a conversation with people that are knowledgeable about the subject and have a level of expertise that might be different than students. Now, this doesn't mean necessarily that they are not for you. The way I like to think about it is, let me pose something to you. Think about a thing you love and know a lot about. Could be basketball, could be Pokemon, could be food, could be a type of music, could be your favorite TV show, could be fashion, could be anything that you are just super passionate about. How do you talk to your friends about it that know about it? What jargon do you use? What shorthands do you do when you talk about that with something you're super passionate about with other people that are passionate? Now, how do you talk to your friends that don't care about what you're passionate about? Would they be able to understand if you talked to them in the same way you talked about people who do know a lot about it? Of course not. And that's similar to the discourse of an academic article. They are for people who know a lot about a subject and love talking about it. So, since critical reviews are a different type of genre from other essays, it's important to think of them as arguments. That's the key goal for a critical review or an academic essay, is that they're trying to present to you an argument, so they need more support and detail than a normal essay might. As such, they require a different reading strategy. We'll call this the read twice strategy. For that, we need to skim and think, then go on to read the essay. So, skim and thinking. Before reading any critical or academic article, make sure you skim with a purpose to create an idea of what you're going to read. It gives you a sense in your head about what the argument might be that you will read in the future. Now, when we say skimming, we mean more than glancing. Anybody can just glance at something. You may have done this with the contract to sign for your phone. You just glanced at everything. But when we want you to skim, we want you to look at and really think about what it is you're going to read. So as you skim, try and do this. First, read the title. Second, read the abstract, if there is one. 3, read all the subhead and headers. These are the bolded sort of mini titles that appear in longer critical review pieces or academic essays. They break the paper down into sections. Take a look and see how long the essay is. Are you going to need to read something that's 20 pages or 8 pages? Try and notice any words that are italicized or bolded throughout the piece. You don't need to worry about them too much, but go ahead and underline them or put a star by them or highlight them so you know that there are some key terms that will be coming your way when you go to read the essay. After you've done all of these things, spend about 5 minutes, and I would suggest you time yourself to think about what the essay may talk about. Take guesses. Think speculatively about what you're going to read. This will help you prep your mind and head to focus on what the argument will say as you read it. So let's skim the essay that we're going to look at. The title is Sound Design for a Found Future, Alfonso Cuarón's Children of Men. Whittington's title here will tell us about his essay. Always remember that titles are the beginning of any writing. They're not different from an essay, they're the start of the essay. So, just from the title, what do we know? All right, well, we know it's going to talk about sound design. So think, why would Professor Buchanan want us to do about sound design? Well, remember that we have discussed sound in film, particularly the use of diegetic and non-diegetic sound. As a reminder, diegetic means sound that the characters could hear that exists in the world of the film. Non-diegetic sound refers only to sounds or music that you, the audience, can hear. That's just for you. So we know it's going to be about sound. What is this idea of a found future? What is that? We don't know. We haven't read the essay. But we do know, since it's listed in the title, that we should pay attention to it, and it will somehow relate to the sound in the film. Headers. I've put the 5 headers from the article on the left here. Each of these headers break down the sections of Whittington's article and tell us how he outlines his argument and what are the parts of his essay. Ringing. We can guess this will talk about the ringing in Theo's ears as it equates to death and loss. Maybe his child, maybe Julian, who knows? Ringing. Again, so we know that the ringing in the ears will be important. And we'll also show that this ringing in the ears will help Theo change from something personal to something political, something beyond himself. Spirits and liturgic dialogue. What's liturgic? We should look it up. We will know he will discuss music and sound now. So it's not just ringing. We know that he will talk about music. Next, the sound in the Bexhill scene. So we will talk about how the sound in the Bexhill scenes represent mayhem and chaos. Finally, how sound works at the end of the film, which would maybe mean the end of the world, depending on how you read the ending of Children to Men. So just from looking at the title and looking at the header, we have an idea of what Whittington is going to talk about in his essay, even if we don't know it. Right. Next, we could search through and look for some italics. There's a lot of italic things used in this article. I have just picked 2 for us to look at. But as we say, find italicized words and underline them. Here we see a lot of words that are technical. So one, we have found future, and then a lot of other words. We can look them up to help us understand what he might mean by this italicized phrase, found future. 1, mise en scène. So mise en scène is a French word, a French theme that essentially relates when we talk about movies to everything that you see in front of the camera that makes up the world of the movie. So acting, setting, character design, staging, blocking, sound, lighting, all of these things will make up the mise en scène of a film. Everything goes together to present you the image that you see in a movie or TV show. Next, we could look at a sense of temporal disjunction. Temporal disjunction has a sense that the time of the film might be broken. It might be at a disjunct. Like how Cuarón's film uses music, sound effects, and popular songs to create a future that is recognizable to ours, but is not ours. He uses stuff that we recognize with stuff we don't. And that disjuncts the notion of time in the film. Whereas another movie might use time from that period. If you watch any film from Martin Scorsese, a lot of those gangster films, for example, Goodfellas, The Irishman, which you can watch on Netflix, uses music from the time period. Next, let's read. So after skimming and thinking, it's time to read the essay. But first, some tips. 1, not everything you read in criticism for a college class is useful to what you are doing. Think about why you have been assigned the task of reading and what assignment the task is connected. 2, critical essays will use evidence a lot. They're going to quote a lot. They're going to summarize and paraphrase a lot. Don't get bogged down with the names. For right now, as introductory students, you can just trust that the author has done their work. Later on in your career, you might want to investigate the type of people the author is citing to see if they're credible in your eyes. But for this class, you don't need to do that. 3, if you are not 100% sure about key concepts, don't worry. You don't have to understand it all. Just make sure you can understand at least some key points of the essay. So, introduction. This is the first part of the introduction. It's a summary of the film that is there to remind the readers of what the article will now analyze and discuss. Also, this paragraph, which is the first paragraph of the essay, is a very nice example of how to write a summary paragraph. It's something you could copy and use in the future. Next, we have the thesis statement. Here is Whittington's thesis statement, which will often be clear in academic essays, but longer than what your professors might want you to write in your own essay. Often after the thesis statement in academic or critical reviews, the authors will present a roadmap of how they're going to prove their thesis. Here, Whittington presents a few key parts of his idea. 1, he will focus on Theo's emotional journey and how the sound of the film will show us his inner feelings, psychological states, and thoughts. He will spend a lot of time on what Theo hears, which, as we remember, is called diegetic sound. 2, he will talk about how the sound design in the film represents Theo's passage from hope to despair. From despair to hope. Excuse me, I got that wrong. From despair to hope. So if you can grasp any part of the thesis, remember that as you read. Remember, you don't have to understand 100%. Just focus on what Whittington says about Theo and his emotions, how it's important to hear the themes of Children of Men, and how sound design helps the audience understand the themes of despair and hope. The first section, ringing and loss. In this section of Whittington's article, he describes the ringing in Theo's ears, tinnitus. For Whittington, this ringing breaks Theo from his surroundings and represents the trauma that the character feels at the beginning of the film. The ringing in Theo's ears represents the trauma from the attack on the coffee shop, represents the trauma of losing his son, represents the trauma of living in a cruel and unjust world that is collapsing, and shows that Theo has lost his capacity for hope, as his dying ear follicles sonically represent the dying of his ability to care for others. In the article, Whittington specifically references the scene where Julian talks about the ear follicles dying and how he'll never hear it again. 2, ringing personal to political. The idea in Whittington's article about the importance of the ringing sound in the film Children of Men gets developed to show that 1, Theo now is doubly traumatized by the death of Julian, but Julian's death, unlike the deaths of his son or the attack on the coffee shop, asks Theo to begin to think about political questions. He must reckon with why Julian asked him to help out Key. Essentially, it forces Theo to engage with the background themes of the movie: nationalism, classism, environmental damage, and understand how his role in this might be something that will force him to change his views on the world and his notion of hope. Liturgical sound, how music mixes with sound. So in maybe the trickiest and most complex part of Whittington's argument, he wants to talk about this notion of liturgical sound. So let's talk about this idea. So if we followed our goal to figure out and look up what liturgical means, we would find that liturgy means how religious worship is constructed. So when we think about the use of the word liturgical, it's talking about how notions of hope and spirituality may be constructed in the film, just like how a Catholic liturgy is how the notion of Catholic belief is built. It's the rules you follow. So Whittington's idea here wants to talk about how Cuarón's use of different types of religious sounds mix to present an essence of spiritual transformation of Theo as he begins to move from the ringing in his ears to a more hopeful understanding. So we have the chanting of Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. We have the mix of that orchestral choir music that we've talked about in the scene in the barn. And then we have classic orchestral pieces using string instruments, all combined to show for Theo that even after the death of Julian, he's beginning to understand the possibility for hope, and that key represents that hope. So remember, Whittington is talking about sound. So what he's talking about is how the music and sound of this film helps reinforce the idea that key represents a system of hope in the movie. That the sound helps you, the audience, understand that Key and Theo and the journey that they are on is one of building spirituality and hope in desperate times. Because remember, as we talked about before in various classes, hope requires belief without verification. The last chapter of the body section of Whittington's essay explores the sound use in the Bexhill scenes. Especially, he wants to talk about the use of the baby crying in that very awesome and amazing series of shots where Theo is trying to rescue Key and baby Dylan from Luke. So one of the things he wants to note that if you rewatch that scene, you have all of the sound of chaos, explosions, and soldiers yelling, and gunfire, and people wailing in pain and fear. But throughout all of that, what will cut through it is the crying of the baby. All right? So this crying of the baby not only represents Theo tracking down baby Dylan and Key to rescue them, it also represents symbolically, through the use of sound, Theo's holding on to hope by a thread. All right? We have the chaos and ringing and trauma going all around him, but unlike the beginning of the movie where he's wrapped up in that, he has a sound that he can hear that represents his attempt to hold on to hope. So one of the things when he talks about with the use of found sound here is to juxtapose the anxieties of a parent, which Theo is probably obviously feeling as a former parent himself, with the anxieties of someone in a war zone. Think about it. With all of that explosions and gunfire and yelling, could someone really hear the crying of the child? We would probably say probably not. But Cuarón, as the director, uses that sound to orientate us as the audience to, in Whittington's article here, to show us how that represents a sound, literally, of hope. Conclusion. So Whittington ends his article talking about the sound at the end of the film. In this very brief section, all of which is excerpted here, he wants to show that even though Theo is dying, the film still offers a chance at hope with the sound mixing in the final scenes. He especially likes to talk about how when the movie goes to black and the film is over, what you hear at the beginning is this sort of playing and crying and all these sounds of children that shows that maybe this journey was hopeful after all. That maybe Theo's journey from someone who was traumatized and in despair to someone who has found hope is a key theme for a found future. So it reinforces the notion that sound plays a key role in developing the theme of hope in desperate times, which is one of the ones that we have noted is a theme in Cuarón's film. Finally, a few quick reminders. As you see, we didn't discuss everything in Whittington's essay. We only discussed the parts of it that might have been central to the research project that you're going to write or the things we have discussed in class. We tried to follow one key thought through the beginning of the essay to its conclusion. We didn't get bogged down in parts of the essay that didn't talk about directly talk about children of men or used other theorists or other words or other ideas that weren't germane to following how Whittington talks about Theo. And finally, just as a reading quiz note, you may use this PowerPoint and lecture to help you, but do not use any words from this lecture or the PowerPoint. You should use only your words and Whittington's ideas. Remember, any idea that you use from Whittington, you must cite the page number of the essay. To not do so will be considered plagiarism. All right, good luck with everything, and good luck on the reading quiz.